of a group called Friends of Two Rivers, and we had an event over by the dam that we called Community Day at the Confluence, and it was another wonderful chance for people to come out and tell stories and hear stories. And Chuck and Mary Erickson and Gary and I went to the grill after for a bite to eat. Vic and Ronald Haggis were there, and we were talking about how much fun it is for the community to get together. And Vic says, we really should do something for Walter Hook.
This came about, and the Friends of Two Rivers wanted to do something for our community. And we talked about doing something art-related in the wintertime, thinking that, kind of dreary, and we'd like to spice some things up and get some more color out there. And so we're talking about doing an art event, and then we looked at doing something related to the Hook thing, and then that came Hooked on Art. And then through that, then we looked to do a community talk about Walter Hook and his art, and then the discussion brought in about having some art classes for adults, and then the discussion snowballed into an art show, and then that just went into the craft fair, art show, art lessons, and symposium on Walter Hook, which led us to today. Very pleased with the turnout, very pleased with the getting involved, the community involved in the school, and giving back. So much of the community gives to the school, and the school needs to be involved in hosting these things to get back.
I'm Mary Erickson. I'm with the Friends of Two Rivers, and I am really tickled and honored to be working with the school and the Dual Art Museum on this project. It has been a lot of fun. And I want to thank all of you for being here. Warren Hampton, who is your facilitator sort of today, got us all kind of hooked on Hook through the process that we've been going through here in the area with our kind of scheming and dreaming for the future of our area. And Walter Hook was brought into play through some of Warren's interests, and then of course the mural on the wall here. So what better than to take advantage of Mr. Hook's incredible talent and to share it with other people. So thank you for coming, and Warren, take it from there.
Thank you. I'll move up here in the front. My name is Warren Hampton. I kind of grew up in this area. I'm mostly from Tura. And as Mary says, I've come into involvement today with this project as part of the Milltown Working Group. And it's a thrill to be here. I think we ought to be sure to thank the staff, faculty, and everyone involved with the Bonner School here today for hosting us. Let's give them a hand. And before we even go any further, I'd like to recognize any of the Walter Hook's relatives that are here. And Janet, if you just stand up.
And my daughter, Nissa. She's a freshman at Bozeman. Sorry,
guys. Our distinguished panel here today, and I'm sorry it's a little more structured than I would have liked it. I was hoping this would be kind of a chat around coffee or at most kind of an interview kind of format, but anyhow. Rudy Audio is here with us, and Rudy, why don't you come up and grab a chair. George Gogurt. Janet, why don't you come up? And Leela, come on. Oh, and Dick Bush, who is a childhood friend of Walter. So this event is, as I say, a little bit of an experiment. It's a little bit structured and it's a little bit unstructured. I'm looking forward to having questions from you, reminiscences from you in the audience. For me, I'll talk just a little bit about what Walter Hook has meant to me. He's a bit of a phenomenon in my experience. I didn't know Walter And my only knowledge of him is through the influence he's had on other people. And I went to high school with Janet, and I'm familiar with her work from back then. And certainly there have been numerous other folks that he's had an effect on. I think, thinking about Walter, from my viewpoint, he was a simple person, but I think he was complex as well. And if you think about the fact that he was interested in physics and math and ultimately became an art teacher, it's really quite interesting to ponder why that is. Right? At 3:30 this morning I was thinking about it, and it came to me. I think Walter was concerned about the order of things. What makes the world work? What are the functions and the activities that are so important to the world? And I find that really consistent, actually, that the fact that he was interested in physics and math and ultimately became a fine artist, that he was bringing all those together. For those of us in the Bonner area, I think it's important to remember that Walter captured our heritage, and this is one of the greatest examples of that behind me here. From 1957, there are a lot of us that worked at the mill. A lot of us here probably still work there. This guy here, I did that for a while, standing with a pike pole, but I didn't stand on a log. I stood behind the chain here on the slasher for a while, and I watched a lot of guys pulling boards off on the green chain. So I think, for me, Walter has achieved kind of an icon status, if you really think about it. He turned what I would call the ordinary into magic. An example of that is if you look at the paintings he did of stacked lumber. All of us at the mill looked at those every day and didn't pay just another stack of wood, right? But Walter painted every growth ring on those ends of those 2x4s. He painted the spring wood, he painted the summer wood, and he cared about that. There was an intense interest in that. I will say too, and I want to wrap up my talk here a little quickly, today is more than talking about art and celebrating art and the artist. It's more than celebrating Walter as an individual. I think today is about finding out who we are, who you are, as a community here, what gives you your identity, Bonner, Milltown, the greater area, and once you have a handle on that, where you're headed. So forming around this today is that larger concern. As the paper said, we have colleagues and childhood friends, and we have relatives of Walter here today. And we're going to talk broadly about Walter the man first, and move into Walter the artist, teacher, and certainly the person that all of you remember. To introduce our panel here today, all of us know Rudy Audio. Rudy is, I guess you could say, born in Butte native. He has and was a teacher within the university system in ceramics for 28 years. He is a founding resident artist of the Archie Bray in Helena. And we all know Rudy's work, and certainly I'm shortchanging you by listing your credentials in 3 sentences, but anyhow, sitting next to Rudy is Richard Bush, Dick Bush, who is a childhood friend of Walter. I believe he grew up next door to Walter, and we're very close friends from a young age, so welcome, Dick. Sitting next to him is George Gogas, who I believe, George, you're a Missoula person, is that right? Good.
Native.
Missoula native.
Endangered species.
Endangered, yeah. George has an undergraduate degree from the University of Montana and a master's degree from University of Washington, got that right? And he taught in the Missoula High School for 28 years. I think one of the patterns you're going to see here is a lot of these people are distinguished artists, but they're also accomplished teachers. And sitting next to George is Janet Julien. Is that
Julie.
Julien? Why don't you talk about yourself a little bit?
Now?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I didn't bring any prepared remarks. Gosh, I just remember Dad as being Dad, and I guess one of my first memories of him being a little bit special was, I think I was in kindergarten. We'd gone over to a friend's house, and Mom had come to pick me up or something, and I remember asking, well, where's the rest of the house? Where's the studio? And I didn't realize then that most people don't have studios in their house. That's one of my earliest memories of Dad being in the studio and painting. Not everyone had that.
Were you, I'm just interested in, too, did you go to college and become an artist?
Dad was always really patient about helping us out in the studio next to his easel. In the back of the studio, he had a little easel for my sister and I, and we used to paint. He would be very patient about giving us directions on doing that. But in terms of following in his footsteps, I didn't. But I think as I grew older in life, I realized that quilting is my thing, so I'm a quilter.
Very
And
good.
I have a great passion for that.
Good, thank you. And sitting next to Janet is Leela Audio, the other half of this tag team here. Leela is from Great Falls, I believe. Across, yeah, across the mountains. Has a master's of art from the University of Montana, right?
Yes.
She's taught at Hellgate High School for 10 years or more. Among her accomplishments, she's been is a founding member of the Missoula Art Museum, institution dear to my heart and others. And with Rudy, she helped establish the Archie Bray Foundation in Helena. So with that, I'm going to be quiet. And if we could start, Dick, if you had some memories or thoughts that you wanted to bring up, we could certainly entertain those if you wanted to talk.
Is you talking to me?
Yeah.
I've only got one here, one ear, and it's a good on this side. I went to grade school, and then here, in the 3rd and 4th grade was Walter. And then I went away. And I came back here to go to high school in 1932. And my folks bought the house next to the Hook House in Milltown, and we lived next to Walter Hook for a lot of years. And during that time, he went fishing with me quite often. He didn't go hunting with me because he didn't hunt, but he did a lot of painting at home, and we did some skiing. And one of the things that I remember about him was that he was excellent in mathematics. And actually he went to university and got his degree in one of the mathematical courses, I don't know which one. But then he left Missoula and went to work for, I believe, General Electric, one of the big companies, in San Francisco, as I remember the place. But after he was there a year or two, he decided that he wanted to get into art, and he went to school down there and got his art degree, and then came back to Missoula and taught the art classes at the Missoula High for a year or two, and then went out to university and became the Dean of Art at the university. After that, I kind of lost track of him. I went one way and he went another, and I never got well acquainted with any of his family, but he was enjoyable to be around, and I remember a lot of the things we did together. He was of Finnish descent, and I used to go next door and visit, and his mother and father they could talk English, but they had plenty to say in Finland. I learned a few words, but didn't learn it all. That'll about take care of it unless somebody asks a question.
Why don't we move along? There's a little tape, a little video that Judy wants to play of Vic Hengus, who was I believe, a student.
In his first high school class, as
Okay, Vic, do you want to tell us who you are and why we're here today?
I'm Victor Hangus, and I had Walter Hook as a high school art teacher, and I'm doing this for the Hooked on Art program. So I'm very sorry I can't be there. This situation came up. I had good intentions of being there, and I'm very disappointed I can't make it, but this will have to be second best.
So, you're a Missoulian. You were raised in Missoula then?
Yes.
So, where did you first meet Walter Hook?
It's actually in the fall of 1954 in the advanced four-year art class. And we got in the class, we knew we had a new teacher and we didn't know anything about him. And he was sitting at his desk and he was kind of looking at the students and looking over the roster, and he happened to ask me, he says, "Do you have any relatives that used to have a ranch up the Sleeping Child of Bitterroot?" And I said, "Yes, it was my grandparents." And he proceeded to tell me that his folks, when he was a boy, used to go up and visit my grandparents. And his parents immigrated from Finland, and so did my grandparents. And I'm sure they became acquainted down here, at the Finn Hall, because they used to come down here and visit all the Finns, and they were a pretty tight-knit group. So, and then he talked about taking the sauna down on the creek. They had a sauna right next to the creek, and they'd jump in the creek afterwards just to cool off. So, yeah.
So he was able to identify you.
Just by looking at me.
Why was that?
Well, probably because of my snow white hair and my Scandinavian looks, I guess.
Yeah, and he also recognized your name had been Americanized.
Right, and our name, actually, Finnish name was Hangusmaa, and then they shortened it to Hangus. And if my memory serves me right, I think his name was Hukka. I think it was probably Hukka, and they just Americanized it to Hook. So a lot of people didn't realize he was a Finn.
What were some of the things you learned from him in art class?
Tremendous teacher. He was so versatile, it's unbelievable. I was telling you earlier that especially with watercolor, and we hadn't really been introduced to watercolor that much, and he was just a master at it. And then oils, and we did wood carving and even some sculpture. And I remember a portrait that he did of a girl that was in our class, at oil portrait, and I think it took him 2 classes to do it, but it was like a masterpiece. I don't know what he ever did with it. And then he loved to paint chickens in those days, and he'd do demos of watercolors with chickens, and I think he just tore them up and threw them away. Should have gone through the garbage can, and I've heard stories later on that people used to go through his garbage can.
You told me a good story earlier about an art piece that he made as a student when he was a young boy.
Okay, yeah, there was the young people don't remember this, but the old timers all remember Eno Weimer. He had the gas station in Milltown. And Eno was a Finn also. And when Walter was a kid, he gave him this little painting, and he used to sign his initials with a W and a fish hook. So Eno, in later years, happened to, Walter, I think, came and visited him or something out at Milltown, and he was showing this painting, and Eno put his thumb over the signature on it and asked Walter, he says, some young fellow gave me this painting. He says, what do you think of it? And he kind of sized it over. And says, you know, it's okay. But he says, I don't think he'll ever amount to anything. So you know, I love to tell that story. So
That was a good one.
yeah.
Then you were a senior when you had Walter Hook.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And after that, you went on to university.
Right. I went to I spent a short stint in the Army, and then when I got home, Ilona and I got married, and I went to university. I was going to take forestry, and after I got there, I found out it was a 5-year course, and I didn't have any forestry classes till the 5th year. So I went and saw Walter, and he talked me into majoring in art. And about that time, I was offered a job with a telephone company, so probably should have stuck it out there, but I figured I should go to work, so that ended that. Then I never really painted for about 25 years, and you know, raising the family and busy and how that goes. About 1980, Ilona and I used to go up and visit Walter about twice a year. He'd call me up, and that's when he lived on Petty Canyon Drive. And he had a studio and a gallery in his house, and we'd go up and visit and look at his stuff. And he'd always encourage me to start in again, so I just decided by golly, I'm going to do it again. So about 1980, I started in again. So and I kind of went for a short spurt, and I haven't done it again for a while, but I'm ready to start in again. So
Once an artist, always an artist, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that there were probably some projects that you might remember doing in some of your high school classes. Under you were talking about some wood sculpture, and so would he just demonstrate for you? And
Yeah, he would do a demo, and then that advanced senior class wasn't very big. There were just a few dedicated students in it, and so we really got hands-on treatment with him.
Worked right side by side.
He was very helpful, very knowledgeable, and you know, I never saw him ever get mad, and I'm sure he wanted to. But you know, a lot of kids in high school take art just for a goof-off class, but the class we were in, we're serious about it. So. But I remember doing wood carvings, and in fact, I've got one somewhere around here. But he did one out of mahogany of a woman, a nude, and it was just fantastic.
Must have been inspirational to work side by side with someone.
Very, very much so.
You told me an interesting story about, as a senior in high school, how you regarded Walter Hook as far as his age.
Well, yeah, I got to figuring out the math. He was 35 years old, and we all, you know, kids, anybody over 30 is old, you know.
Yep.
And we all thought he was old, but he wasn't.
Now we know better.
My youngest son's way older than that. So.
Yeah. Our perspectives do change.
Exactly.
Do you have any favorite pieces of art of Walter's that you would like to have or admire in particular? Any subjects?
Yeah. Well, there's one, I don't know whatever happened to it. It was a watercolor he did, and it was all red, but it was a winter scene of Grant Creek. And I asked him, you know, why they're red, and he says, well, he had bought some watercolor paper that was already pre-colored, and it was pink, so he didn't want to waste the paper. So, and it was fantastic, and it was, you know, it sounds weird, but it was beautiful.
You also mentioned to me about his sense of humor.
Oh yeah, well, very dry sense of humor. Yeah, one time I asked him why he had kind of the weird ideas in some of his paintings, and he said, well, I do it just for fun, and kind of tongue-in-cheek, and he says, I love to go to shows and stand in the background, listen to people try to psychoanalyze me why I did it. So he had a very dry sense of humor. All you got to do is look at his paintings to figure that out.
Well, any parting comments? These are great stories, and
well, just that Walter was my hero, and he still is. So.
That's wonderful. Well, thanks for sharing your stories, Dick.
Are there other people here who are students of Walter's? You. All right. Yes. There you go. Leela, did you want to talk about that a little bit?
well, I suppose I could. When we first came here in '57, he was the head of the department, and he was such a good teacher because he was quiet and he always had that smile on his face. So you could never get him upset, even though people played jokes in that department all the time. And I remember once there was a shipment came into the department of his paintings, and the crate was standing against the wall, and it had on it some kind of something somebody lettered on there to go with the show. I don't know where it went, traveled around, and said the most famous artist in the Northwest. And while he wasn't looking, I think it was Jim Duke. No, he wouldn't do that. He put a piece of paper over Northwest and he wrote Milltown. We loved that. And once, oh, this is about him too. It's a funny story. When they introduced life drawing, they had a model after some years who posed in a nude. And during a break, she would go into his office and sit while the kids would get a Coke or something. And one day when she was in there taking a break, the phone rang. And it was Marg, and she said, I'd like to speak to Walt. Is he there? And the model said, no, he's not here at this minute, but I'll tell you what, I'll get my clothes on and go find him.
Someone else? Yes.
Well, that immediately brings to mind another very similar story that he told me about when he I haven't really thought this through, so but he I went to his class and he had a painted black eye, and he showed up, we looked at him and we said, well, what is wrong? What happened to you? And he said, well, there was a faculty member who decided to play a joke on me, and he found some ladies' nylon stockings and put them in my coat pocket while it was hanging up. And so I put my jacket on and went home, and he was sure that my wife would find these nylons. Well, as I was taking off my coat at home, I realized there was something sticking out of my pocket, so I pulled it out, and I knew which faculty member had done this. So when I got up in the morning, we painted up my eye, and made it look like that I had really been beaten up by my wife. And then I appeared at the art department, and the first person I saw was the person I knew who would put this in my pocket. And the person looked at me and said, my God, Walter, what's happened to you? And he said, well, I don't know, but someone stuck some stuff in my pocket, and my wife really got upset. And he would not admit it. He was so ashamed.
Was there another over here? Anyone? Okay, why don't we talk to some of Walter's colleagues here? Rudy or George, do you want?
Well, I have some prepared remarks here for the reason last night I just decided to think about all the wonderful times I had had with Walt, and so I had to record a few of these things. But I just found out that the two jokes I was going to tell, so I can't go through them. And you had it wrong, by the way. Well, there's so many things about Walt. When we got here in 1957, he was the chairman, and I think that under Walt, he was one of the finest chairmen that we ever had at the university. He was a little sly and liked to play jokes on some of his people, but on the whole, he was very dedicated to teaching. I'd like to talk about his teaching a little bit, because Walter was one that, when it came to teaching in a classroom situation, he was always a leader. And even though he didn't always talk a lot, he would sit down and he would perform with an easel and his painting. And kids could watch while he painted, and they could see the problems that he would have from time to time, and they could see how he solved them. And this was a great lesson. They could proceed with confidence once they saw that the teacher himself was involved with the processes of creation, watercolors, oil painting, or whatever was demanded in the class. And that was a great lesson for me as well, because I was setting up the ceramics program at the time. And one of the best ways that you could ever reach your students was to show and perform and show what kind of problems you had to deal with. And in that way, he was not only the chairman of our department, but he provided a great example of the teaching that had to go on at the university. When we got there, that department was very small. There were about 4 of us, Walter Hook and Jim Dew and Aiden Arnold and myself, and a newcomer who was teaching art history, what was his name?
Turk.
Rudy Turk, and who has gone on in his lifetime to become an important art historian all over the world. And that also, he was also a recipient of a lot of Walt's good advice and good teaching. But there were other things that Walter and I would do together, and I've written down for one memorable experience that I had was when I was setting up the ceramics program. We had to have a clay mixer, and I suggested that if we could find some kind of a dough mixer or something that was used in a bakery, why, that would simplify our problems a lot, because we had to mix clay, and we had to find ways of making that easier for a horde of students that were starting to come into the program. And Walter picked up on the idea that he had heard of a dough mixer, a bakery dough mixer down in a little bakery in Dillon, Montana. So we loaded up his pickup truck and took our overnight gear, went to Dillon, and we found this dough mixer, and we loaded it into the truck, and he almost got a hernia lifting that thing around. Can you imagine a chairman of a department going around lifting things like that? And we finally got it up, placed it into our shop, and it was a very tough trip, but it's the kind of thing that Walter would do. He'd be willing to roll up his sleeves and get off his academic perch and actually get down to brass tacks and help you get the program going. The other thing I want to talk about is his art. Now, Walter, to me, was one of the most versatile, one of the most capable and skilled artists that I'd ever met. And I think that he was a kind of a synthesis of all of the things that he knew. We knew that he was a mathematician, and he had a degree in physics, and that he taught at the university before he became a lifelong dedicated artist. But to think of his background in all of these complex sciences, and then he would turn to his art to complete his interest in his sophistication in one of the most difficult of all things. That he'd had this great background, I guess, from his background here at the Bonner School when he was a kid, and learned to draw very well. I saw some of his very early drawings that he had done. But there wasn't a technique that he didn't master after. And I often felt that, okay, Walt, you're into doing a lot of things here. When are you going to settle down and start doing something that we can identify with? But Walt was one who was always curious, and he could sit down, he could do fine oil paintings, he could do tremendous watercolors, and the story that you just heard from Leela was actually based in the fact that he was one of the most renowned watercolor artists in the whole country. Watercolor is a craft in a way, and it is an art that is not held in such high esteem today, but at that time, watercolor was considered as a kind of a master's program if you could do it. It had to be done with great skill. You had to understand the washes. You had to understand how the paper would dry as you painted. And there were so many things that could be picked up with the technique of watercolor that I always admired him for his great skill in doing that. In addition to all of these, he was a very inventive guy. And one time, when we were working together on the St. Anthony's Catholic Church in Missoula, he devised a lot of ways to work with cast cement. Now that doesn't sound very, very interesting in that he created negative molds, for example, out of styrofoam that were, if you understand the idea of negative shape, he would carve these things into styrofoam. And then when the casting was done, there would be a wall with an image once they pulled the styrofoam negative off the wall. It was quite an interesting innovation. And then at other times he learned how to carve these negatives so that if you ever go to the St. Anthony's Church and you look on the wall, you will see the 12 apostles that are in cast cement sections that fit like bricks, one atop the other, and couched in liturgical design. And at that church, he also did the Stations of the Cross and many other little features that were part of his vocabulary of making things. The baptismal font, for example, he created that. And those had to be done from scratch through understanding of how to handle media and materials. And that it went on and on. Walt Hook was sort of a genius at using craft and how to make different things work. Always admired him not only for that skill, that capacity, but the fact that he was such an excellent draftsman. There was a time when he worked for the atomic research people, when he would sit up at a blackboard and the scientists would discuss these terribly complex ideas, and they'd want to make them practical. Walter would do the visualizing of these complex machines that these scientists were creating. So it was a very creative atmosphere. You can imagine, with Walter over here doing drawings and the scientists trying to visualize what all these atoms and what these machines were doing. As a matter of fact, as a consequence of that, Walter could not talk about his scientific background for years because the knowledge that he had in his head at these meetings was highly classified information. So that was another surprising thing about Walt, that he could reach in so many different dimensions. One of the funny things that my only remaining joke after is that we were once discussing the curriculum of the university and the art department, and it came up to the matter of should we require our art students to take a foreign language, Spanish, German, French, or something like that. And Walter and I, who are both Finns, we suggested that the Finnish language might be a good one. That was turned down by the faculty. I still thought it was a good idea because we could talk Finnish to each other. And I'm sure that there are a few Finnish descended people here who can appreciate that. And we still miss Walt. He was a great friend, a great teacher, and a great innovator. One of the most brilliant guys I ever knew, and we had a lot of fun together. We still miss him. Thank you.
George, did you want to add something?
Yeah, kind of a tough act to follow. I knew of Walter Hook about 16 years before I met him. And it came about this way. My father had passed away, and I was 10 years younger than Walter, exactly 10 years younger than Walter. And at about the time that I was 12 years old, my mother decided that maybe we could make a little more money by renting out one of our bedrooms. And this is a Greek connection now. I'll get to a Finnish connection later on. So she rented one of our bedrooms to George Ephantis. George Ephantis was the one person now, art department at the University of Montana, which was then Montana State University. And so George Ephantis lived with us for a year. And periodically, I mean, even though I was just a young kid, the name Walter Hook would come into the conversation. And I finally figured out that Walter Hook was some type of a star art student of George Ephantis's, and he was at that time. Well, you know, being a kid, it didn't make all that much sense to me, but the name had come up quite often. So I knew of Walter Hook, but I never met him until 1957 when I came to Missoula County High School, and Walter had been my predecessor once we moved. Well, like the PowerPoint showed, he was here in 54 and I came in 57. He was at Missoula County High School as well. And so we met while he was teaching painting and art education at the university. Well, we became friends, but not really close friends until into the 60s. And Walter was the type of a guy that, as everybody has mentioned, was really friendly and approachable. So when it came time for me to make the move to get enough credits to get at the top of the teaching salary, I approached him and he said, "Oh, sure." He says, "You know, you've got this graduate degree and we'll make sure that you get these credits." He said, "We'll put you on independent study." And that's what I did for 2 winter quarters in 74 and 75. Well, our friendship became even closer at that point. He would start me out at the beginning of the quarter. We'd get together and discuss what I had proposed. And then sometime about mid-quarter, he'd drop around and see what I'd done. And then at the end of the quarter, we'd evaluate what had transpired. I tried to work hard because Walter was a serious artist. And although he wasn't teaching me, you know, directly, he taught me indirectly, and to this day I'm indebted to his influences. Out of this independent study at that point came a series that I did that I called the Montana Midnight Series. The reason I called it that was I did it in Montana, and I did it at midnight. It was the only time I had time to work. And Walter at that time was living up Patty Canyon. And I don't know if many of you realize, but he had a gallery up there that he attached to his house. A pretty nice gallery space too, with the type of lighting that was correct, and it was just it was a nice space. And he gave me a show of this series. And I was really impressed. I was honored first, and then I was impressed because I was getting a little depressed with the series as I was painting it. It kept getting darker and darker and more obscure. And I thought, oh, this is bad. My friends were saying, "Gosh, Gogus, you've gone over the edge." And it wasn't really a pleasant group of paintings, but once Walter got a hold of them and he put them up in his gallery and he put those lights on there, I went up and looked at them before the show opened. I was blown away. I thought, wow, these aren't all that bad. So, I was indebted to Walter in many ways. The influences, though, that I got from Walter, as I said, were not direct, they were indirect, and I felt probably the two most important came from him by him actually doing what he felt, and that influenced me. Walter was serious in his work, and he worked hard at it. Everybody, brought out his humorous side. Well, he was a serious artist who didn't take himself seriously, and I thought that was an admirable trait. But he felt that you should explore the directions that you feel are important to you. And I think he did that in his teaching throughout, and I like that. And the thing that those thoughts led me to was this business of going in any direction that I wanted to, and Walter did that himself without falling into a signature style. And a lot of artists want to have a signature style. They work toward a signature style, and they feel they haven't arrived until they have one. And Walter didn't feel that was all that important. He felt that if you wanted to pursue a direction, just go ahead and try it out, experiment, and see what the conclusions were. So that inspired me, and to this day I've been eclectic in my work. So that I felt was what I really got from it. He maintained his freedom throughout, and never restricted himself to anything specific, although you could always see the hand. I mean, the hand was always there, even though his style changed. To get to the finish connection, I felt was kind of an interesting thing. For some mysterious reason, I think the year was either 1984 or 85. I was at Big Sky High School by then. We had 3 foreign exchange students from Finland, and 2 girls and a boy. And before the year was over, this idea came to me. Why not introduce these 3 Finnish exchange students to 2 really famous Montana artists who happen to live in Missoula, who were of Finnish ancestry? So I contacted Rudy and Lila. They said, come on over. And I contacted Walter and Marge, and they said, come on over. So we made a date. And I asked the kids if they wanted to do it. They said, oh yeah, we'd like to do it. I said, well, we have to do it after school, and we'll have to do it in my car, and we won't be covered by insurance. They said, that's okay. We'll do it anyway. So we did, and we went over to Rudy and Lila's first, and they were very gracious. And Lila served some tea, and Rudy showed the kids how he was working with the computer at that time. And they were really impressed. And then we went up to Walter's, and same thing happened. They were very gracious. And one thing that Walter did, Rudy, that you didn't, he threw a few Finnish words out at him. And then he gave each of them a rolled up reproduction of his work. And I told him when we got back in the car, I said, don't you guys ever throw those things away, because they're going to be worth something to you later on in life. So that was one of the things that I thought was interesting about the Finnish ancestry. So anyway, Walter was very special to me, and to this day, and if we ever go to the Two Rivers restaurant with a group of friends, I won't do it with the same group of friends, but anytime we go with a different group of friends, I always take them into that other room off the side of the main dining room,
and I say, there's a photograph of a young Walter Hook right here, and you guys have the same print in the entrance right here. And people have been impressed. In fact, Tom Rapon was in there one day having breakfast, and I said, Tom, I said, you want to see something? I said, go to that corner. There's Walter Hook right there, the young man. That's all I have to say. Anybody else go?
I think we, thank you.
Just a spin-off from all this, if I can call Warren a spin-off. He has redesigned our Missoula Museum, and it is wonderful. So if you get a chance, when it opens in June, go visit. I think they're going to open then. He's turned that old library into a 6th-level museum with 2 elevators and a kids' painting room with a rubber floor, and I should have rubber walls too. It's really, really nice, and I think that you'd love to see it. Okay, that's it.
When I said, when Walter was going to high school, or long about that time, he'd paint me a picture. And about the time he got through painting the picture, somebody would offer him $5 or so for the picture, so I said, well, you better take it. In those days, the dollar was hard to come by. And this went on several times, so that I don't have any of the old pictures that he had painted, but I always figured that he needed the money and go ahead and take
Yes, thank you. I'll add one thing about paintings. In the late 60s, for some serious reason, I was just telling Jennifer Reifschneider there, that Hellgate High School had a vibrant art club. This didn't happen every year. I mean, this just happened to be one of those special years when a bunch of kids were really interested. And there had been an extension added on to the first floor of the east wing toward the south, a room made of concrete blocks with no windows. This was a classroom with no windows. And we looked at that, and the kids said, gee, that'd be great for a gallery space. And I thought, well, that could be. So we talked to the janitorial staff into putting up the molding that used to hang, that the people in the late 1800s, early 1900s would hang their pictures on, because you could put S-hooks into that molding. And so the janitorial staff put that up, and they did a good job. And then we started giving shows to artists in Missoula. We did one with Jim Dew as well. And we definitely had Walter Hook do a show. And he brought this series of paintings, and I'll bet that most people in this room, or even Missoula, have not seen any of those paintings. They were geometric paintings. They were cutouts on plywood, and he had glued canvas onto the plywood. And he'd done all his own framing. He was very handy as a wood craftsman. And it was a pretty good show. I mean, kind of a big town show. And the kids liked it, and I really liked it. And after the show was over, I said, have you ever thought of trading, Walter? And we agreed on a trade, and I have one of those paintings. And it's about this wide, about this tall. It weighs close to 30 pounds because it's on half-inch plywood. Great painting. Geometric, kind of an optical illusion. And I was trying to explain it to Jennifer. I can't do it verbally, but it's an optical illusion and it looks like it's constructed of wood, and where the wood is held together by screws, he's got real sheet metal screws screwed into the wood. And Walter sometimes, didn't always divorce himself from representation. He figured out which side the light source was. And on the side opposite the light source, under those little sheet metal screws, he painted little shadows. and the little shadows changed as they moved toward the light source. I just love that painting. I wouldn't give it up for anything. Anyway, that's my painting story.
Go ahead.
I've got to say something. All these wonderful comments about such a wonderful person. Walter was my teacher in high school at Missoula County High, and he was my advisor as an undergrad and grad student at the University of Montana. And some gentleman here mentioned the fact that he never saw Walter mad, and I didn't either, although I'm sure there were times when he got a little irritated with me. I could sort of tell. But he never did get angry with me. He was very supportive. And I think I remember the most is so open. For example, I was about ready to graduate. He says, Doug, I made an error. I think you're a credit and a half behind to graduate. He said, there's a little competition going on here about cars. Go home, draw a picture of a car, bring it back. So I did. Okay, I graduated. And in graduate school, I had to take this oral exam. And I was pretty kind of worried about that. Walter says, don't worry about that. I have a friend in another department, and he owes me something. And he's going to sit on the committee. So, I got through. So, he was a great teacher. I always remember him. And like I say, everything that was said today, I would agree with.
I just wanted to tell the audience about this gentleman here who just spoke. He was not only one of Walter's students in high school, but he became an outstanding student at the university. But in addition to that, he went back to New York and eventually to Maryland Institute of Art and started a ceramics program from scratch, and it became one of the most advanced, most important schools of ceramics in the whole country. And he's here with us today. He moved back to Missoula to be close to his roots. So I'd like to give him a hand.
Any others? Yes.
I have a question. Has anyone here ever actually attended a board meeting with Walter, and where was that meeting held?
I didn't hear your question.
Is there anyone here who ever attended a board meeting with Walter? He frequently told me about going to these board meetings, and I'm wondering where the meeting was held. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Well, I guess I qualify. I don't remember our faculty meetings being very long, and he handled most of everything pretty much himself. I think the greatest, well, one of his innovations was to hire a secretary. Can you believe that? And it was half-time at that, and he handled most of that by himself. Walter Hook was not one to extend a board meeting very long. I don't know if that comes close to what you were looking for.
Not quite. I think he talked about going to a board meeting, and he was meeting with some of his buddies. The local watering hole. He always talked about, when I talked to him, he said, well, he's got a board meeting he's got to get to.
Good meeting.
Yes, right here.
Well, I was into the ceramic program pretty heavily myself under Rudy Audio, and I would stay after class, and sometimes after 4 or 5, 6 o'clock, and Walter Hook started sneaking in, and I would be there all by myself, and I'd see Walter Hook trying to master clay. There was some project coming up, I think it was sort of a faculty art sale, and so he made some slab pieces, rectangular, and then he take, squeeze something on top, like a pop little bottle, and then you maybe take some coils of clay and slap them on the side, an X or an O shape or something. And then they had a faculty art sale, and this, I think, was at the end of my freshman year or about 1959. And we had such wonderful faculty at the university, like audio and Cook and Dew and Turk and Arnold, Dayton Arnold. There wasn't enough money to buy all of the things that the art department needed. So our faculty members would make things during the year and then sell them and use the proceeds to buy paper and other supplies that, you know, an art student could not go out and buy an entire roll of butcher cut this big around and that long just for his, so it needed to be in the classroom so everyone would be able to use their 10 feet. And so, you know, thanks to people like Audio and all these faculty members I just mentioned, that we had these people that would work extra. And so the sale came up, and it was in the lodge, and this pot sold for $10 or $12. Well, I was enrolled in an art class, in one of those art class, and a month or two went by, and for some reason I just was wandering along Railroad Street or somewhere along Woody, and there were several places that sold used tools and things. As I walked past the window, across from Alan Vicks, that was there then, I noticed this water hook pot sitting there, and I went in and I looked at it. My God, he can buy that and resell it again. It only has 50 cents on it. And so I first in the class the next day, I was a little bit late, and I sat there in front of everybody. I said, "Yeah, pot that you sold, you can go buy it at whatever the place was. It only costs 50 cents." And I didn't realize until when I said it, what it had done to his prestige. And his comment was, after thinking a few seconds, well, that's probably what it was really worth.
Well, I can speak to a couple of things on the meetings. I could always tell when Dad had a faculty meeting coming up, and maybe you guys remember that. He had this old corduroy sport coat that he would wear that the strings were hanging off on, and he would purposely wear that day so he could trim the strings off at the meetings.
I remember that.
He also had a pair of work shoes that the sole was flapping down on, so he would take masking tape and wrap it around the toes. So I knew what faculty meetings. I was just a little girl then, but I remember that. And the board meetings that you might be referring to are the Lit Club meetings. The Lit Club meetings were a little poker group. So they played for pennies. They had a lot of fun with that.
Okay, I think we'll wrap it up. I would encourage any of you to, these folks will be around a little while, so to talk to them further. We'll continue the discussion. Can you do anything on that?
Well, I was just going to ask maybe if we could find out a little bit of what entailed the painting of the mural. It was in 1957, commissioned, or he painted it for the new school that was built here. And it was in the lunchroom. It was the wall of the lunchroom for almost 40 years, as I understand it. And then, but it just must have been quite a project for him to paint something like that in 1957 when he was just starting out, I think, at the university. Did you know about it, George, when he was doing it?
Well, he was at the university. I just come in, you know, his little kind of high school, but I was aware that he was painting this thing. I didn't see it for a few years.
I think I was at the university. I was a freshman teacher. I was aware of him painting something in Bonner, but I never actually saw it until maybe a year or two later. And yes, he was engaged with this at about 1957, 56, 57.
How do you paint something on that large scale?
Well, I think that whenever you work on that large scale, there's a lot of problems involved. First of all, you usually start with some sort of preliminary idea that helps you keep things in continuity. And, you know, obviously if you're painting on this side, on something that's big, you want to relate it to something that's on that side. So you have to keep that kind of continuity going, and that's not always easy. So the main idea, of course, is to plan it carefully in advance so that you'll have most of the composition of the mural in mind before you actually start doing it. And then oftentimes if you have a small design or a smaller scale design, you can section it off so that you have squares that are enlarged, and then you can go ahead and, you know, develop it in a larger scale. It's something that artists will learn over time. Saves you a lot of work if you plan it again. As architects would know.
Planning ahead is very important. Thank you all, and I want to thank our distinguished panel here today, and thanks for coming.